Welcome to Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in Homeschooling. Today we are talking with Peter and Tania. We talk about their why and how they started in a time of low levels of social encouragement. This was still the era of homeschooling pioneers. We talked about the inevitable curriculum choices. There weren't that many to choose from. Sourcing literature books and the all-important role of the parent in overseeing the development of their child's character. Peter and Tania tell us of the joys, but also the challenges they faced. You will appreciate their honesty. I remember hankering after the advice of homeschooling families who had years of experience. Apart from the few books already published at the time, or perhaps a speaker at a conference, there were few opportunities to sit at the feet of a range of experienced homeschoolers. So make sure you subscribe, like, and share this channel so others can sit at the feet of experience. It could save you and them time, trouble, and money. It will certainly reassure you and enable you to get on with it. One of the objectives in bringing you my podcasts is to create what I needed in our years of home education and make it available to as many homeschoolers as possible. Today's interview does just that. Warm welcome to you, Peter and Tania. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on to Coming Home and talking about homeschooling from a veteran perspective, but also as a married couple. We have been asked to have some with reflecting both the parents' perspective. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's all good.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Let's start by going back to the beginning, back to your beginning. And if you could go over how you came to be homeschooling.
I suppose we were in our mid-30s. We had two children aged around about, say, 6 and 3, they must have been. And my husband was doing teacher training in a Christian environment. And we became convicted, I suppose, that the responsibility for our children's education is not with the state, it's with us. And many things are like that. You know, it's our responsibility to raise our children. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use a verse from the Bible, but there's a verse.
Go right ahead.
And in Deuteronomy, it talks about God's commandments to your children, wherever you are, sitting at home, walking in the street, talking to them from the time you get up in the morning till you fall into bed at night. You know, just that consistency of sharing your values and the consistency of behaviour that's expected. It wasn't really sort of all about academics. It was more like parenting full-time and not passing your children off for, so many hours of every day to somebody else who could be teaching them anything.
Yeah, well, you always say things better than I would say then, but from my perspective, I was in the middle of teacher training in the Christian school movement, and as much as I was getting immersed in the Christian education scene, through that training period, we came to recalibrate our thinking, I suppose, that it really was our role, our responsibility to raise our children in the Lord, and that's what we wanted to do. And yes, we could have done that in the Christian school movement, but we got a little bit inspired about actually homeschooling, and so by the time I was ready to start my role as a teacher in the Christian school movement, we were up and running. So yeah, having had a taste in the Christian school movement, we already had some idea of the sort of things that we wanted to do.
While we were down where Peter did his training, our children started out state school, did a year there, and then he went into the Christian school down there. And when my daughter started school, she also was there.
Where did you get the idea initially of homeschooling? Because way back, what year was it that you started?
This was somewhere between, so 1993 to 1995, and it was kind of out there, but I think it was reading Francis Schaeffer there.
We had a number of required reading books as part of my training on the whole undergirding philosophy of Christian education and talking about different approaches like Charlotte Mason and as Tania mentioned, Susan Schaeffer Macaulay had written this book called For the Children's Sake, and between those books and probably one or two others, we already had bought into the idea of the importance of Christian education. And so I don't really know how we got onto homeschooling, but I think that was probably you got the vision for it more than me, I think.
It's a little bit hard to remember now. We're talking like 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah, 30 years ago.
Our eldest is 37 today. So
yes. So you got started. Were there other people homeschooling around you at the time?
When we were down in Kapiti where Peter did his training, I think it would have been frowned upon generally by the people we mixed with. The Christian education people would have got it. But we didn't actually really get started with homeschooling until we came back to Auckland. I remember that when we were gearing up for homeschooling and Peter found out that he had a position at a school in Glenfield, I remember quite clearly actually that the principal there thought that we shouldn't be homeschooling with him in the position that he was because we may be depending too much on him and taking his focus away from his employment with the school. And so they strongly suggested that we started our homeschooling with the ACE curriculum, which would take some of the pressure off Peter. But of course, the father is the principal of a homeschool. So I don't like that attitude that came through there. I understand what they were saying. First year being a paid teacher. So we started out homeschooling in 1996 using the ACE curriculum, which we understand is not everybody's cup of tea, but it worked quite well for us and we quite like it now.
I'll return a bit later too because I'd like to hear more of what you've got to say about the ACE. But for now, I'm just interested in that social pressure, if you like, at the time that you were put under. What was it about that pressure that was put on by, well-meaning and influential Christians that made you not cave to that influence and stick to homeschooling?
Stubbornness. It was, I'm not afraid to swim against the flow when I feel it's the right thing to do.
You really got the vision for it, I think.
Yeah.
And Frank, to be fair, I was keen for us to do it too, but my focus at that stage was a new career in teaching was totally absorbing my energy. I was learning on the go as a teacher, so I was putting in long hours for my job trying to support this homeschooling venture, but aware that I had to also give my full commitment to my job. So really Tania was carrying the load. And so whilst we had this very structured ACE thing going that was ticking the kind of core subject boxes, we were also exploring things that we thought would sort of turn on lights here and there and enjoying reading, whether it was Winnie the Pooh or Lord of the Rings or whatever. They were sort of quite rich experiences that we could enjoy with our children.
There's a saying that says, education's not the filling of a bucket, it's the lighting of a fire. I'm sure you've heard this many times. That's what you really want, is want children to grab hold of something that they can follow. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I look back on our homeschooling experience, and really it was Tania who was doing it, so I'm not criticising that, but just conscious, as probably any homeschooling family is, of all the inadequacies of what you're doing. What I can see that happened for our children is they were sort of set free to be themselves and not have to be like everybody else. We've got one daughter who is a bit of an Enid Blyton clone, and you can almost hear it in the way she talks and writes to this very day, just the colourful way she writes and speaks. And I put it down to having her nose in Enid Blyton books and other books like that through those sort of...
just wholesome stuff. Yeah.
So your vision, if you like, or a goal or a purpose of realising that you're not filling a bucket but lighting the fire, that would have been something that kept you focused. What are some practical ways then, as you went about choosing the books that they were going to read, the activities you would get them involved in? How did you actively focus on the lighting of the fire?
So it would have been choosing the books, and because I got very interested in the sunlight curriculum. It's actually very American, as is the ACE, a lot of it. But They had lists of books that were good for children to read at different ages. So I managed to get hold of some of those, and then some of them were actually a little bit of a disappointment because they were really too American to be appealing to a Kiwi kid, you know. We did read quite a few Elsie Locke books about New Zealand history and the Māori Wars and things like that, and the Tarawera eruption, remember yes. Tarawera? And yeah, so things like that, but there didn't seem to be a lot of worthwhile books coming out of New Zealand. You know, you have to look elsewhere. And not always things that people say are valuable to read turned out to be all that valuable.
Yeah. You mentioned that the living books, which is like a Charlotte Mason perspective, if you like. So let's say you're going into the library where, well, for two things, choosing books off the shelf, but even more exciting, they're having a big library sale. They're getting rid of books. I would walk away from those days with a banana box full of books. So when you're looking at books to choose from, just to take home to build your library, how did you figure out what met your criteria for a living book? What were your standards?
I suppose I was looking at authors that I was familiar with. I would be looking for something that had a wholesome values, wouldn't be looking at, for me, things like witches and that sort of stuff I would avoid. Historical books are always good because people learn, you know, Laura Ingalls Wilder and all that. There's a lot to learn from those about how people have lived in the past. But again, they're American.
I remember reading about when I was reading the Charlotte Mason thing, and she was describing what she meant by living books. And the thing that stood out to me, she made the distinction between just a dry textbook imparting information and a textbook that actually captures a child's imagination, or a non-fiction book. And one example that must have been quoted somewhere that we picked up on was a book about Tutankhamun's tomb, and she mentioned a particular book by a particular author. And there are lots of books about Tutankhamun, but we checked this one out, managed to hunt it down, and it was great. It was so interesting. You could see the difference between that and just straight information dump. So kind of had to pick them up and read them for a bit, or maybe let your children pick them up and see if it draws them in. But we are talking about a family of readers here, and not everybody's wired that way.
That's
so
right.
we're not saying this is how everybody should do it, but this was what we were doing, or trying to do at least.
There's no escaping, though, that a really easy way to learn is through very good books. And if you're not a natural family of readers, it could be an ideal opportunity to start to learn about the value of bringing really good books into the home.
Some of our children enjoyed the Willard Price books, and they're just things like Safari Adventure and Lion Adventure, and really it's just like reading Famous Five, but while they're doing it, they're picking up all this amazing things that they'd tell us about over dinner or whenever that we never knew about whales or volcanoes, and they were just reading fiction and learning stuff without realising it. Or maybe they did realise it, but it didn't matter because they were having fun doing it.
That's lovely. You must have gathered together quite a good list over the years of putting together some really good books. And I know that homeschoolers are always on the prowl for book recommendations. Yeah, so if you can think of any as we go, do drop them in, because I haven't come across Willard Price for a while, but I remember our eldest getting into a few of them for a while, but I'd forgotten about them. I'm going to go back to something that you just mentioned before in passing, but I thought, oh, that's interesting, because I haven't heard anybody else discuss this, that often the father is in the background and the mother is at the coalface of the homeschooling. It can often feel that you are carrying most of the weight. And in a lot of ways you are, because you're the one with the time at home doing it. But I'd really like you to talk more about that concept of the support of the father encompassing you around your homeschooling unit.
In our family life, the husband is the head of the home, and while the mother might be looking after the children, and doing the homeschooling or whatever, we're a team. And it doesn't mean he's the head of the home, doesn't mean that I'm inferior to him in any way. Am I?
No.
Yeah. but that's his role is to be. His role is to lead the family, and mine is to support my husband, helping to raise our children. Yes, at that time I was an at-home mum, obviously, so I was the one that had the time, and he definitely didn't while he was teaching.
Well, different families are going to have different dynamics between the mum and the dad, and I'm a pretty placid sort of a dad, I suppose, and Tania's a bit more of a go-getter. So when Tania says I'm the head of the home, that's a kind of, it works. I don't feel like I'm suppressing her, but the buck stops here, and I think the children know that as well. So, I'd like to think that if Tania says jump, the children will say how high, because behind that is me as well. And it's not that I'm being draconian or anything like that, but I think having both parents committed to it is a major plus in a homeschooling scenario. If I was expressing doubts about whether we should be doing it, it would undermine the effectiveness of what Tania would be able to do.
You had the concept of Peter being like the principal, even though he wasn't actually present in the homeschooling everydayness for very much, you still had that understanding there, and I just find that a really interesting concept for families to think about.
Even if he's not physically present, he's there because he has the respect of the children, and they know that he'll be home at dinner time. I'll always be home at dinner time, and there could be accountability if required. You know what I mean?
There's a sort of a flow between where does homeschooling stop and family life begin. There isn't really a hard line there. Obviously, you've got bookwork going on, doing your maths and things, but actually the overall vision of homeschooling is actually just raising your children, and that goes on from the moment they open their eyes till they finally nod off at night, doesn't it? And afterwards, when they're asleep, you're maybe still discussing it as parents. So that's a very blurred line as to what constitutes homeschooling and what's just ordinary family life. The bigger picture is we want to raise our children well.
Where does education and life stop and start? There isn't really anything. So can you kind of reflect for a little while then upon the reality of especially when your children were young and even as they were growing up some more, how you practice just the reality of that everyday life as an education, the world as your classroom? How did that kind of work out for you?
We kept chickens.
Things like reading to the children at night, so you're being part of that, fostering love for books, in a nice environment.
I don't know, family holidays, you're not thinking of as education, and you're not going to have a test on Monday, but you're just having a life experience that hopefully is enriching everybody's lives. And most of our children love camping. We've just done it all the way through, and now they do it as themselves as grown-ups. So I think that's a lovely thing to have imparted. I've always played instruments, and most of our children now play instruments. It wasn't that we set out to make them, although we did put them through piano, some of them through piano lessons and others we didn't. But it wasn't terribly well planned or even well executed, but it just happened. Again, it's partly in the DNA, but it's a very blurred line as to was that a homeschooling thing or was that just us doing life?
It's the example.
Even parents who are not homeschooling are going to take their kids to music lessons or swimming lessons or all those sorts of things. They're just what you do in life when you join the athletics club because you want to give your children the best opportunities you can and what you think is going to be good for them.
That starts to kind of merge into what I was just thinking about next, or actually what the next question is on the list, to be fair. And that's what would you define were the most important things to you both over the years of homeschooling, not just in terms of academics, but skills that would be a good idea to learn?
I have to say that I have never been very good at getting my children alongside me in the kitchen to cook. That's an area I could have improved on, giving them that benefit of my experience.
Well, I think both of us are quite quiet, reserved people by nature, and we've probably been guilty of not bearing our souls enough to our children in terms of the struggles and the ups and downs of life. Some families they'll talk about anything, and it's all out on the table, and it's all open for discussion, whereas we've both come from quite reserved upbringings and tend to keep our internal ups and downs to ourselves. And probably in hindsight, that would have been better if we could have learned in our own development as people how to be more open,
communicate better with
our children, and talk about whatever. If I could turn back the clock, I'd try and change that.
Okay, interesting. Flip that over from things that you're looking back and wishing that you could have done differently, or maybe in your mind a little bit better. Think about some things now that you actually set out to do and you did a really good job in doing it.
Okay, we wanted our children to follow their own path and to not be lemmings just following blindly after whatever came their way. But we also had certain guidelines that we expected them to follow in terms of Christian faith and stuff. That's
social graces.
Social graces,
Yeah, just things that you do as parents, I suppose. Yeah. I don't know that we were quite strategic enough to sit down and think things through like that and write them down.
We weren't really.
We muddled our way through it. I think our children have probably got quite creative bent in them just by virtue of DNA. And so I think we gave them quite a bit of rope to develop that, or at least gave them the opportunities. And it has been nice to watch those creativities, the way that they've enjoyed them and developed them themselves. So that's probably been a good thing.
Yeah. And you want to give them the skills to get started on whatever is going to float their boat as adults, really. You want to give them just light that fire, I guess.
Well, when it comes to the nitty-gritty of academics, not just in hindsight, but also what you've seen as the years go by in and out of education, what would you advise then? Let's put it that way. What would you advise are priorities in academics? Because there's so much to choose from. How do you know when to stop teaching something or to maybe leave something out completely? Because you know that in the scheme of things in a child's life, that may not be as crucial as doing something else would be. Is that too vague?
Some people say, you teach a child to read so they can read to learn. Obviously, reading, writing, learning how to do basic numbers, that's the bottom line. You have to have those in your curriculum. The idea would be that you're encouraging children then to read the things that interest them, or that if you were doing a whole family thing, we're all reading books about such and such to further our knowledge about it.
We'll go back to your ACE because we used it for a year too. And there are so many sums, let's say, on all of these pages. And I remember struggling over that the children should do them all because they're all there. It's proper. And doesn't a full page look so lovely and complete? When did you stop that? How did you know what to do?
Yeah.
I'm going to talk in my experience of it, not so much from homeschool, but I have worked in schools where we've used ACE as well, so I'm quite familiar with how it plays out. And trying to think back to our homeschooling days, probably back then we felt a bit like you that, gosh, we've got to get all these sums done on this page, and then there's another page and it's just the same again. And you felt a certain amount of being in a straitjacket of what has to be done. And as the years have gone by, and I've seen the pluses and the minuses of ACE and other curricula, we've learned to recognise that you need to look at what's the bigger picture here, is that I want my child to learn this thing. They need to do enough practice that they really do learn it, not just that they get it done. But we may not necessarily need to do all 35 sums on this page to achieve that goal. Now, there's a balance and a trade-off there, because there's also value in a child learning to push through and work, even though they might rather be off riding their bike. No, you actually need to stick at this and see it through. But that's where wisdom, you need wisdom as a parent to kind of get that balance right, because you're wanting your child to develop not just to know how to do long multiplication, but to develop a certain amount of character to finish the job that they started. You need to look beyond the actual what's on the page that they're having to learn and look at what am I wanting my child to grow in here. Yes, I want them to learn how to do long multiplication, but I also want them to grow up to be a mature person who can manage themselves and will finish what they start. They will do a good job. Those sort of character qualities are underneath that, and curriculum like ACE and others are just a tool that can help you achieve that or help them build that into their lives. And so nowadays, or if I was to turn back the clock and we were using ACE to homeschool our children, I would have a lot more freedom to cut and paste. One child might need to do all 20 sums on that page because it takes that many for them to know how to do it. I quite often tell families that I work with that rule a line down the middle or across the middle and say, when you've done this half, we'll mark it and see how you're going. And if you've got them all right, we'll move on to the next page where, reward for a job well done. So, but again, always keeping in balance the underlying goal of character. And one of the downsides of a curriculum like ACE is that you can forget that. You get sort of tunnel vision because you see the thing in front of you that you feel obligated to do every last full stop on it, and you can lose sight of the bigger picture.
You mentioned character a couple of times in there, Peter, and it does remind me to stop and think about that. We can get tied up in all of what we think are the shoulds in the education for the children. Because when you homeschool, you haven't delegated, have you? And there were days I recall that I felt that pressure a lot of needing to get a certain amount done. Whereas concentrating on the children's character behind all of that, undergirding kind of what we did as academics, that trying to get that balance all the time was something that I struggled with every so often. But because you've mentioned character a couple of times, as a homeschooling family, that was clearly important to you. That would have been one of your reasons why you began it in the first place. Do you want to add anything else to the importance of overseeing the building of a child's character?
I think character is everything because it's what carries them through life. It's how they meet an employer, it's how they make good friends, it's how they develop in their careers and in their relationships with other people. The bedrock of that is character. Yeah, so they just take that character throughout their lives. They might forget how to do a long multiplication, or they might forget, about the pharaohs in Egypt or whatever, but their character is their bedrock, the life, yeah.
You're going to go and do a job and suddenly you need to know, let's say you're going to be a builder and you need to know how to work out the angles of a roof, you can learn that maths relatively quickly. I'm not saying you shouldn't have learned it in your schooling, but you can learn the necessary skills and information you need for a job. But if you haven't got the character underneath of that character only really happens slowly over time. You can't suddenly learn character. It happens day by day, helping with the dishes and finishing your work and learning to be polite to that person that when you just want to be grumpy. So those things, they take years to slowly grow in each of us, whereas the skills can be learned if need be.
What do you think the benefits were for you personally over the years of homeschooling?
I felt a certain amount of fulfillment because I believed that I was doing the right thing, and it wasn't always easy.
And I think for me, being in the background, really, I felt a stronger sense of us being a family unit during those homeschooling years. It was like being on a bit of an adventure together. Easy for me because I wasn't the one at the cold face. And we weren't really doing exciting stuff, but it felt like an adventure, children having chickens and rabbits and things that was a bit outside my comfort zone, but we had a kind of a richness to family life that possibly wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been homeschooling.
People who are listening won't know that you were so influential on our family that was why we started to homeschool. Similar to you, having to go through the whole process of thinking it through and dealing with the naysayers. What we saw in the Thomas household was part of what was important to us as we made our decisions too, because we could see the reality of what you were setting out to do. We could see that there were easy times and there were certainly hard times, and you'd already worked through your why, which helped us to figure it out too. But when I mentioned it to you the other week, you kind of seemed quite taken aback that you had that kind of influence on us. It wasn't something I don't think we would have homeschooled if you weren't in our lives, put it that way.
Oh, that's very cool.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
After the children, because I remember you moved away for a while. I think we spent that first year together homeschooling. I think it was in 97 when we started, and we spent quite a lot of time. Was it 1 or 2 years we spent together?
In 97, 98 we were together,
Uh-huh.
and then we moved up to Wellsford in 99 for the Christian school, which Peter was heading up. And we continued to homeschool for a while. When we had our 4th child, we were a little older than average, put it that way. And at the time, our eldest was 15, and he was not always a nice person at that stage in his life. That's an understatement. So we had big struggles then, and our second child was on the verge of teenager, although she was not difficult. So we ended up giving up on the homeschooling and putting our children into the Christian school. Rightly or wrongly, I don't know.
I think that the homeschooling was grinding, wasn't actually grinding to a halt, but it was definitely hitting some fairly major potholes, because it was harder for our oldest child in particular. The change of town and change of life for him was really quite hard as a young teenager. And I hadn't envisaged how difficult that would be. I thought moving to a country town would be lovely and just a wonderful part of a homeschooling experience. But in actual fact, it was hard for him in particular, because we'd uprooted him from a network of friends he had, and suddenly it's actually quite difficult at that age to forge new friendships amongst people who've already got friends. We went through some difficult years there in the homeschooling, and when the baby came along, the 4th child came along, Tania was very busy with the baby as well, and you really needed the older ones to just get on with what they were supposed to do, and without having to have the whip cracked. And also I was fully engaged in a job that was very demanding, so not probably as much help as ideally I would have been. So all in all, it just became too hard. But in hindsight, I think probably if we'd been able to look further ahead, we would have said, no, let's just back things off a bit, take our foot off the gas a bit here and give ourselves some space, sort of circle the wagons and look after our own troops, help our oldest boy through this tough time, and maybe not expect so much of our homeschooling of ourselves, of what we were trying to achieve, and think, no, they'll be okay. We can, we've got a baby to bring up here, get the kids more involved in that, and not worry quite so much about the book work. But you feel like we've got these teenage kids, and you should be preparing them to get out into the big wide world as well. So you've got to make it up as you go along. And so that's what we did. And in hindsight, we'd probably do it different. Whether it would have turned out better or not, I don't know.
So basically, I lost confidence that what we were doing was good for the children. And I guess that would be a regret, as Peter said. Should have just backed it off, sort of taken the easy ride for a while. You know what I mean?
Giving us a bit of a breather.
Yeah.
But don't we always find the rear vision mirror quite clear when at the time it's just like you're navigating through sticky mud and a major obstacle course? And I think it takes a fair bit of grace and wisdom, for better or for worse. I think you make the decisions you need to at the time. For yourself at the time, they were right to do. And it's not till years back when you look back, oh, I wish we'd done this and I wish but we didn't. We made what were the best decisions we knew how to make at the time.
Right. Yeah.
And so we can be awfully, awfully hard on ourselves, can't we? But if you push through something and it just ends up being so hard for everybody that it's just almost damaging, when really just to know, okay, for whatever reason, it's not working for us right now, we need to change something. especially when in the beginning you've got quite strong convictions about parenting and what you're going to do with your education, but sometimes it isn't actually the way it works out.
I suppose to a certain extent I did feel like it let us all down by changing tack, but I still felt that it was important for my children to be in a Christian environment. Having said that, both of our elder children spent a year in a state school, which was not great for them in the end. And not personality-wise, it was especially for our second child. And our older child was kind of wandering after the wrong things for a while.
Panned out okay in the end, but we were really a bit lost in muddling our way through those years because we were trying to deal with adolescence, with the pressure of my job and a baby. There were a lot of balls to juggle, and they weren't easy ones either. I think actually the foundation had been laid well enough prior to that, thank God. And from all the hard work that Tania had done, they had this foundation that was there. And so even though we had a few wobbles through those years, essentially the bike was going in the right direction. Yeah.
Did you have any support around you at this stage that you could go to try and help figure this out?
We were in a homeschooling group. It was quite a small group because the town we live in is small. And a lot of the people the Christian people we knew were in the Christian school. Not that they were pressuring us to be in the Christian school. There was just a small group of homeschoolers, and I don't think there was a lot of support there.
I think homeschoolers tend to operate as islands. They might get, I mean, there in various towns, there are homeschooling networks that get together and do nice stuff, and that's great if you can be part of that, and some of those are great. But I think also you can, as a homeschooler, feel a little bit like an island because if you're part of a church, most families who are in church are not thinking like that. They're just doing the normal thing of sending their kids to school, so they don't really get it. And maybe that's reading too much into it. Maybe you're too self-conscious about it. But because they're not doing the same thing that you're doing, you can't really talk it over your ups and downs in it because it doesn't. They can't relate to that.
Mm-hmm. If you were to come across a family you recognise that they were going through the same things that you had, or similar things, we'll say, that you were going through, and they were asking you for your advice, what kind of things would you actually say, do you think?
Yeah, I think you would say, well, do you remember when you started homeschooling, what did you want to do? What was your vision? Have you been satisfied with that? I know, you're struggling now, but has that been a good thing for your family to be doing? And thinking of the good things that have come out of it and talking to the kids about what you're finding hard, and this is what we're going to do, and just having everybody on board, everyone on the same page, if you like, kind of regroup and then carry on. But not to just give up for the sake of giving up, as long as you can remember your vision.
I think trying to identify or recognise who your children really are and who they're becoming, because you go into parenting with this idea of what it's going to be like, and I quickly found out that it wasn't like I thought it would be, because one of our kids, you'd say, let's do this, and they'd say, they're 3 years old and they're saying, I've got a better idea. And you kind of think, oh, hang on, I'm the dad here. This is a great idea. But it's just a personality type. But by the time they're teenagers, I think you have to be a little careful that you haven't pre-boxed them into what you had intended that they would be, because they are their own unique self. And so ideally, and most of us don't know what that thing is that we're going to become, or what's the next thing. We just feeling our way, but not being so locked into our mindset that we've got that we can't open our eyes to see, actually, we need to help them develop this thing, or give them a little bit of room here, having enough wisdom to help them explore something that, because it might be that's something that God has put in them that you didn't realise was there.
The individuality of the child is really important, and that's one of the advantages of homeschooling. They're not being squeezed down like toothpaste out of a tube. They're able to develop their own and be themselves.
Read a book too, read various books on parenting and talking about, I'm talking about the teenage years, which can kind of throw quite a few curveballs at you as they start to, I guess, individuate. And you can have sleepless nights worrying about your children through those years because you're starting to feel like they're letting go of the apron strings or whatever it is, and you're not sure where that's going to lead to. But if you've done your homework through those early years and laid that foundation well...
Character.
Yeah, providing you don't let them go off and get into drugs or whatever those destructive things are, their lives might not look like what you thought or...
Oh, doesn't it take the wisdom of Solomon and the patience of Job sometimes? I know that there are going to be families that are really grateful for the honesty you've just shown in that, because I think it's so very easy to talk about the successes and the wonder of homeschooling, what a fantastic life it is, etc., etc. And I don't think we're doing other families a favour.
Yeah, I think so, eh?
Yeah, that's what I would hope for. Yeah.
Yes.
And another thing I've tried to remind myself when I look back on things that I think, I wish we'd done that differently, is that each of us is writing a story with our lives, in a sense. Our lives are kind of like a story. And our children's lives are also their story. And maybe some of the chapters that we had influence in the writing weren't so great, but it is their story, and God is at work in their story as well. And we've got to trust that He will work that out.
Yeah.
Very much. Which sets you free in a way, doesn't it? What's that, Tania?
It does. I just said, good man. Just agreeing, because that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yes.
It's not all going to be perfect.
Because, I mean, really, we started homeschooling quite some time ago, and the nature of how to do it has changed a lot with resources and everything that's available to families now. But just the everydayness of how a family ticks over and the challenges that we all face, there's not much difference between 96, 97 and 2023. So if you could time travel, what would you go back and tell your just starting out self, Tania? Well, Tania, you first. What advice would you give to a younger you?
People say, don't sweat the small stuff. Try and be a little bit more chill, I guess. Not so hard on myself, because when being hard on myself puts pressure on the people around me. Keep the workload manageable and give the kids plenty of spare time to follow their own inclinations within boundaries, of course, and to be relaxed about it. It's not my natural game. I'm not a relaxed person.
Yeah, I just wouldn't want you to think that, knowing you personally as a friend, that you could have been a different person, because I think you are who you are, and we can all beat ourselves up for. I remember throwing myself on the bed and just howling with disappointment in myself.
Yeah.
What was I doing to my children?
Yeah.
I think we can be very aware of our own personal flaws and just be so blissfully ignorant of the wonderful things about ourselves.
Probably my biggest fault.
But I hear what you say about, being a bit more chill and relaxed.
Learning to relax a little bit more, somehow making myself relax a little bit more, I think.
Some families do teenagers really well, and I think probably because of our reserved nature, probably got a bit uptight through those years unnecessarily. If you ask me what I would say to myself would be to just enjoy my children more, because I'm quite a task-oriented person, and I would probably look at the work and think you should have got more done, or, we must get our work done today. But if I could somehow balance that with actually just enjoying this precious time we have as our children are growing up, you hear it, people say it's gone in a flash, and it's been quite a long time, but it still feels like a flash. They are pretty precious memories, some of them, but also to realise that going into this, you will have days when it doesn't go very well. I found this out as a teacher in a classroom. You have some days that are just a write-off, and you think, why am I doing this job? And frankly, the magic moments only come every so often when you think, wow, that was great, somebody's light goes on for something. I'm doing it in a classroom now, but same happens in homeschooling. You're grinding away day by day doing the routine stuff of do your maths, do your whatever it is your subjects are, and some days that is not very glamorous. I think, well, I'd imagine, because I haven't actually homeschooled, but that's my perception. And I know that's how it is in a classroom. That's okay, and some days are just a bit of a write-off, and you might need to just put the books away and say, let's take a break. Now, you've got to be careful you don't do that every second day, because then you're teaching your children that it's okay to give up every time the going gets hard. But there are some days when you just need to call time on it and say, let's go out and go for a hike.
Good advice. Are there any other reflections that you'd like to happen? Is there anything that was on your mind as you mulled over the questions that we haven't actually talked about yet?
Something that you asked about what advice I would give to fathers, and I don't feel big on giving advice because I feel like I'm just muddling my way through life anyway, so what advice would I give? But something I've noticed, and this seems so unfair on mothers, is that what fathers say carries an awful lot of weight in the family. When a mother compliments a child on how well they've done something, the child takes it with a grain of salt because that's what mums do. When a dad comes home and praises a child for something, they grow 3 inches out of that, and it seems unfair on the mother because she's done all the hard work. I realise that might be hard for, say, a solo mum to swallow, and in no way do I want to devalue what a solo parent is doing to homeschool their children. I take my hat off to them because they have to fulfill more than one role. But even in a solo parent situation, if there are engaged men around, like be a grandfather or an uncle, somebody trustworthy that can also contribute in some way, that can really be a big support to the mum.
But look, thanks guys for being so generous with not only your time but your experiences and the reality of it. It's been such a privilege to listen to you. I love listening to folk who aren't afraid to talk about their dark days. I'm much more likely to heed them more than those who only bring the positive. We all know life brings its joys, sorrows, and the matter-of-fact days in between. So be encouraged to know that all of these days are normal. I know there are listeners who are living these challenges now, or know some who are. Take Peter and Tania's advice, step back and get the support and help you need. If you would like coaching or counselling in your homeschooling, contact me via my website, cominghomeinfo.com. I hope you have a good week. Now off you go. You've got a family to raise.